Hi, everybody. Diana here at Heartfelt Creative. Thanks for joining me for another episode of Patches and Pieces Monday. And welcome to the new sewing space. We just it's the same space, physical space, but we did a little bit of remodeling. And if you're wondering what all the clocks are about, I'll tell you really quickly. So I'm in Central Time in the United States. That's Central Time right there. My friends in the UK, that's your clock. My friends over on the East Coast, that's your clock. Mountain Time, that's your clock. And Pacific Time, that's your clock. I still need to put signs up, but that's what those are for. Because I always get a question, well, if it's what time is it my time? So I've given us clocks so we can figure that out more easily instead of standing here counting on my fingers. Anyway, welcome in today. Patches and Pieces Monday is normally a little time that we spend together looking at different quilting blocks, how to piece them, how they can be used differently. So if you look at it in one way, can I mix the pieces up and make it look different? So we kind of look at different quilting blocks in that way. But last week I told you that this week we're not going to do a block. We're actually going to talk about a technique of quilting. So this is not going to be about long arming or free motion or machine embroidery quilting or even hand quilting. But this is this is how I was taught to quilt by hand over 55 years ago. Okay, by my grandmother. She unfortunately didn't have this product that we're going to look at today, but it makes quilting super easy to do on your domestic sewing machine. And it allows you to be able to plan your quilt design out, do some things that are a little more intricate than you might feel comfortable for. And I just call it trace quilting. And you'll see why here in a minute. A lot of folks tell me, I can't free motion. I just can't get the hang of it. That's okay. I'm not the best at free motion, but I like it. Some people say I don't have a long arm. That's okay. You don't need a long arm to quilt. And I do a lot of quilting on my embroidery machine even. And people say, well, I don't have an embroidery machine. And so that's okay. You don't need one. If you've got a domestic sewing machine, you can quilt, or you can always use this technique and quilt by hand. Sometimes, even though I don't do a lot of other hand stitching anymore, sometimes I still like to do a little hand quilting, not hand binding. That's a different, binding and I are machine only these days. But anyway, so I put together a simple 9-patch quilt top, like a mini quilt. Let me just hold it up here for you. It's kind of in process, but it's just, you can kind of see, there's just 9 5-inch squares from a 5-inch charm pack. I put them together. I layered it with my batting and my backing. And then I just spray basted it with a little 505 spray, temporary adhesive for fabric. Okay. That's all you have to do to prep. When this is done, I'll probably make a cushion cover out of it, but this is a great way to practice. And you don't have to do anything freehand unless you want to. So I'm going to talk to you real quick about thread. When I hand quilt, and when I want my quilting to look like it's been hand quilted, I use this type of a cotton thread. It is a 30 weight, and it's a little bit heavier than what you might normally you would hear 40 weight or 50 weight. This is a 30 weight. It's a little heavier. It's 100% cotton. It is the kind of thread that we always used to use by hand. And yes, it does have a little bit of fluff that comes off of it. So you'll have to probably clean your bobbin case after you've used something like this, but it's worth it. And that's what I'm actually going to be showing you the quilting with today, this very thread right here. And this one is by Coates and Clark, I believe. Yeah. So for machine quilting or hand quilting, but it's a really good quality cotton thread. The other thread that I love to quilt with, and that I probably quilt with 99% of the time, is Aurifil. Either a 40 weight or a 50 weight, 100% cotton. Very little to no fluff and fuzz comes off of this, but it's a little bit thinner, you can tell, than the one that I showed you. Just real quick regarding what color thread to use for some of you who may be newer to quilting is this Dove Gray by Aurifil. I love it. The color sinks right into the fabrics. You don't really see it, and you see all the beautiful piecing. I also have this kind of a creamy ecru color that I use sometimes, but this is really my go-to. Now, there is one product that I want to talk to you about, which is going to make this process of trace quilting really easy for you. When I first started quilting, and I would be with my grandmother and her friends at their sewing quilting get-togethers, we would trace with a light pencil right on the fabric with our quilts. I know people today go, oh, but that if it's light and you're using that 30 weight thread, you don't really see the pencil, and it'll wash out. It will. Nowadays, we have so many nice ways to mark our quilts. We can mark with chalk pencils. We can chalk with friction pens, heat away. Now that you have to iron everything to get that to go away. I know some people don't like to do this on the top of their quilt because there's this idea out there that when your quilt gets cold enough, all those marks will show back up because of a little bit of residue that's left behind. If you wash your quilt, that residue is washed away. You won't have that problem. And I still use a good old-fashioned number 2 pencil. And I use a mechanical one because you can get a really thin lead. Let me see. You can get a really thin lead. Gosh, you can hardly see that. Let me make it come out some more. And so you can get a really light traceable line. So I don't worry about that all the time, but some people do. So the product I'm going to show you is going to help take care of that whole problem. Excuse me. So the product is called quilting paper, golden quilting paper. Okay, it comes in a row of 20 yards. It's 12 inches wide by 20 yards. I spent $8.99 on this whole roll. Here's the roll I'm actually using now, and I've been using this for a while because it really lasts. Now, I was telling you that when I did it with my grandmother, we would mark right on it. Some ladies took to using newspaper and marking on. I highly discourage that. You will get newsprint on your quilt. You'll get it on your hands. Some people say, well, I iron mine to set the dye in the newspaper. I suppose that could work. I've never tried it, but it seems like an awful lot of work to me. And also the main reason I don't like using newspaper in this technique is that it's really, you spend a lot of time pulling the extra paper out of the stitches when you peel this away. This peels away super clean. Some people also say, well, can I use tissue paper? Yeah, you can, but it's more like newspaper. You're going to spend a little more time picking stuff out of your stitches in the end. But what golden paper seems to be to me, it seems to be a golden colored paper that is just like pattern paper used to be. I know pattern paper nowadays is less crinkly. It's more of a tissue, but pattern paper used to be really crinkly. Can you hear that crinkle, crinkle, crinkle? And this, to me, it seems to be what this is an old type of pattern paper, and it works a charm. I'm going to flip the camera over now. Oh, where did I get this? You can get it on Amazon. You can get it at any of your good quilting shops. That's where I get mine. Thimblesquilts.com, I think, is their website. They're in Lockport, Illinois. That's where I get mine. But I'm sure you can find it online as well. And it's just called quilting paper or golden quilting paper. And it's by Golden Threads. That's the company, Golden Threads. And it's called quilting paper. Okay. So I'm going to flip my camera over and I'm going to show you how we use this. And then I'm going to actually finish the quilt and then we'll take it off. So with trace quilting, it's just what it says. You can kind of see here. I've got my quilt sandwich and I've got a layer of this golden paper, just like I do with my backing fabric and my batting. I've made it larger than the actual square is, or the quilt, just so that if I can pin it down, if anything gets wonky, it won't adjust into the actual quilt. So the nice thing about this method is you can use anything to trace patterns onto the quilting paper. So I just used a little plastic die that I had to trace out my little starburst shapes, my little squiggles here. I just did those with my hand. No, they're not all the same. No, they're not all perfect. I find perfection highly overrated. So I'm going to show you the back. You can't tell where I've come off my lines a little bit, that these aren't all exactly perfect. It's just nicely quilted. And so the nice thing about this quilting paper is it allows you to plan your quilt out because you can see through it to your blocks. Now, I do something to help me with my planning process, and you can kind of see it right here on the center. I come in and I make a little mark at the four corners so that if I'm placing a template in here that I'm going to trace around, or if I'm freehand drawing in here, I know what my boundaries are for that area. So let's say I wasn't going to do something in each square. I was going to do something in each four patch of this piece and have this whole piece. Then I would put a mark here and a mark here and a mark here and a mark here to draw my space out. Just helps me with the idea of boundaries. Helps you decide whether or not in the end you want to do any in the ditch. And that's the other nice thing. A lot of folks say, I'm really tired of doing only in the ditch quilting, but I don't feel like I can do anything else. This will allow you to do a lot more detail into your quilting. I think you'll really like it. Now you're seeing all these threads, right? These are all my tails that I will bury into the quilt when it's done. So because this is only 12 inches wide, one piece was not wide enough for my whole block, my whole quilt, but that's okay. I just laid another piece on top of it. So right here in the middle, this is all 2 pieces wide. That's not a problem. I was still able to see through it. I was still able to easily sew through it. I had no problem at all. So what I do is I don't stick the paper on. I don't use any kind of adhesive with this. As you can tell, I've crunched it up and moved it around to get all of my stitches done, and there's no tears in it. But what I do is I use these really long flower petal pins to hold down my edges. I don't use pins a lot. A lot of times I'll use wonder clips or quilting clips, but for this I do use these. These are a really thin pin, and so even if I accidentally hit myself on them, I haven't really ever really stuck myself badly with these. Covers a little more line or a little more space as well. So that's what I use, but truly any pin to pin down the paper will work. And so I start off by pinning my 4 corners, then my sides, to make sure it's all nice and even and flat. And then I start taking I use my heat erasable pen, my friction pen, and I start doing my drawings. And I did all of my little starbursts. And then I thought, what do I want to do in here? And I thought, you know what, I'm just going to do a little squiggle. And so, no, they're not all exactly the same, but they're close enough. And I think they're fine. So once I have everything on here and it's all, now you might want to do this with pencil in case you decide, oh, you know what, I don't. So I was going to put, you can see maybe right here, it's a little hard. You can see I was going to put a little shape in the center of the starburst. And then I thought, no, I don't really care for that. So because I did it in pen, I didn't mark it, or wasn't able to erase it, but I can just take and mark that out. So I make sure as I'm quilting that I don't accidentally quilt something that I don't want to quilt. The only thing I'm going to suggest with a pen or a pencil, however you trace lightly, because your pen or pencil tip will go through this. It won't hurt anything, but you don't want to start ripping your paper. It's pretty sturdy. You can tell I've had to squeeze it under the machine and all in places, and it hasn't ripped, but your pencil as you're tracing, or your pen, can punch a little hole through it. So we need to be careful about that. So I've got my quilt laid out. And where do you find shapes? One thing that I like to do is buy the big plastic templates for stencils, for stenciling walls. It can be pretty intricate. You could put a big one right on here, mark the parts that you like, and then go and quilt those and do a whole block in one big medallion type shape if you wanted to. So I just kind of freehand draw some of my own templates sometimes. Sometimes I have little plastic templates from things that I use. Actually, I think, I'm not sure where I have this one from, but this was a little template and these were freehand drawn. So now that everything is stuck down, I can go to my machine and I can, with my machine, I can trace around and sew around my little shapes. And then when I'm done, I'm going to take out my pins and easily peel all of this away. But you can already tell I've left one undone, this one here, because we're going to go do that one so you can see. But you can tell when I flip it over to the back that it looks really nice so far. Everything's nicely spaced. Looks pretty good. So I'm going to flip the camera now over to the sewing machine, and we're going to go over there and we're going to do this last little starburst shape. All right, so I have my machine set at a stitch length of 3, only because I like my quilting stitches to look more hand done, probably because I've done them by hand for so long. And so oops, excuse me, just 1 second. I forgot my magnifiers. Let me step back around and grab those. But probably because I've done so much hand quilting over the years that I'm used to that look and I like it. So I use a stitch length of 3. I wouldn't go smaller than a 2.5. And depending on your design, I'm not sure that you really want to go higher than a 3.5. Okay, so I'm going to start right here. I've got my stitch length set. I'm going to take my thread in my hand, just like with any type of quilting. I choose to bury my threads at the end, my tail. So I am going to pull up my bobbin thread. So how I did that, I just held the top thread and moved my needle up and down. And now my bobbin thread is up and it's something. There we go. And if I accidentally like that, it got stuck a little bit, pull too much, I trim it down. I don't want it, really long. Alrighty, so I'm going to put my needle down and I'm going to pull my threads to the back here a little bit, keep them out of the way. And I have my machine speed on medium so that I don't let anything get out of control. And as I come, as you can tell, I'm on the line, but if I get a little bit off, it doesn't matter. Like I said, this is not about perfection. This is about just doing your best. Beauty, they say, is in the eye of the beholder. Well, I guess perfection is too. And for me, it doesn't have to be spot on perfect every time. just do your best. But all I'm doing, as you can tell, is I'm just tracing around the design. And you can see I'm squishing this underneath here, and my paper is fine. My quilting paper is fine. It's not ripping. And I suggest that when you first start and try this, use some simple shapes. Maybe a heart, maybe something like this little starburst that I'm using, maybe just some circles, just so you get used to it. And remember, when you're going around curves, if you choose something that's curvy, just go slow, stop and adjust and pivot anytime you start to head in another direction. So I'm going in another direction and I'm stopping and pivoting. And you can tell it's not really taking me very long to do each little starburst shape. Get my threads out of the way there. And I just keep going till I'm all the way around. And when I do a full quilt like this, I will tell you, I start on the very middle. So when I started on my center starburst. That's just so that if anything is going to get bunched up or crooked or anything like that, it's going to work from the outside, from the inside out, not the outside in. I'm not going to get a big clump of anything on the inside of my quilt. And now I'm just going to stitch over past the mark that I started with, just a couple of stitches. I don't back stitch, I just stitch over for this, so I don't get a clump of stitch somewhere. And now that I have this up and I've trimmed away my bobbin thread, I've pulled it up through, and I'm going to clip my upper thread, and I'll come back around because that was all it took to get that star done, that little starburst done. And it was really quite simple. Let me flip the camera back. So that's as hard as that is. And you can trace around with your sewing machine any design you want. Let me flip the camera back here to the overhead now, and we're going to go through and take up these pins. Do you all have pin cushions for every type of pin you have? Maybe that's just me. Maybe I'm goofy, but I have a pin cushion for these types of pins. I have this little pin cushion for my little glass-headed pins that I use for piecing. I've got my big one for all my general pins. I don't know why I started that, but I just started using different pin cushions for every type of pin that I had. I suspect it's just my own goofiness there. All right, so I've got all my pins off. Now I'm going to just start here at the corner, and I'm going to slowly start to tear my paper away. And really all I'm doing right at this beginning is I'm kind of tearing away my outer edges. I'm not worrying about the inside pieces yet. And I'll kind of show you why that is. And you see it tears pretty clean. Get all of this. And it's not pulling my stitches out. And that's the one thing that you want to make sure is that your stitches don't get pulled out. So I'm doing okay there. Now I'm going in. Because I have a bit of a double layer here, I'm trying to get my double layer out. very little bit. Stuck. You know, it's going to take you a couple of minutes to get all of your paper away. But see, even if it sticks, like that little bit just stuck in there, but it pulled right out. I didn't have to even use my tweezers to get it out. It just came right out. So there is that small piece right there. See, it just popped right out. With newspaper and all, you really have to use tweezers to get it out, I find. Trying to be a little bit careful so I don't pull on my tails too much, my thread tails. But see how easy this is coming off? And let me just tell you that this is a little bit therapeutic. I kind of like that. Kind of like opening a gift at the holidays when you get in there and you just pick it all out. So there's a little bit that got stuck, but no problem. It pops right out. So it pulls away really cleanly, this quilting paper does. And as you can tell, I'm not getting very much of the little bits stuck in thread at all. The one thing I've found over the years is using a quality product or the right product for the job really makes a difference. And that is really so true with this versus using something that you're just using because it's all you have on hand. And I get it. Sometimes we all use just whatever we have on hand. I know I've done that as well, but when I can, I really try to like to use the right product for the job. I just find that it helps me get a nicer result. It makes me like my result more, actually. So I'm just pulling this out. There we go. See, it's just taking me a couple of minutes. And you can tell, except for my strings, everything's nicely quilted. And when I'm done with this, I'll just bury my tails, I'll trim it up, and I will bind it. And I'll either make a mini quilt, or maybe instead of binding it, I'll put an envelope back on it and make a pillow cover with it. That's the one little place right there that it kind of got caught in there a little bit, but it's still coming out with my fingers, so there. That was one of the spots that had a double piece on it, so. Nicely done, almost completely done. So to do this whole piece, to quilt it after, you know, I've marked it and all, took me about 20 minutes to quilt it. That wasn't very long. I don't go for speed, but you know, if you're concerned about how long it take to use this, I would say it takes longer to set it up and figure out your design than anything else. But that's the nice part of it. You really get to plan exactly what your quilting is going to look like based on your drawings. There we go. So now, all done. And hardly any little bits that had to be taken out. A couple tiny bits here and there. Let's flip it over. Now you can see it fully quilted from the back. I know that light's a little strong. Let me see if I can adjust that a little. Does that make it easier to see or harder to see? A little bit easier maybe, but it's all nicely quilted. The front's all nicely quilted. I'll go through with the needle and bury my tails, and then I'll either do it as a wall hanging or I'll do it as a pillow cover. Now, if you like to do quilt as you go, this is a great way to do quilt as you go. You can set up your whole block, quilt it, and then put your blocks together in the traditional quilt as you go method. So it's a really easy way to do your quilting. Let me bring back over the camera. Wait, one more. There we go. There we go. So you can see that using quilting paper can really help you do more than stitch in the ditch when you quilt. It can help you plan out your quilt, plan out what you want those designs and all to look like. Now, because I used a cream thread on this, you really can't see it, but you can kind of, as I back up, you can see that it's been quilted. I like my quilting to sink in. I like my patchwork to show up more, but you might be somebody who wants your quilting to really show, then use a really bright, beautiful color that coordinates with your piece and you'll love it. So that's all for Patches and Pieces today. Thanks so much for joining me. I hope to see you again next week in whatever time zone you live in, and we'll do some more piecing some new squares together. Thanks for joining me. Bye now.